History is all around us. There are secrets of our past around every corner, hidden in our streets, buried under our feet. And in this series, I'm going to be uncovering those secrets by exploring Britain's most historic towns. That sent shivers down my spine. That's amazing. I want to find out which towns across the UK can reveal the most about each period in British history.
You're in my way! Get out of the way!
I'll be deciphering clues in familiar landscapes, bringing lost landmarks back to life, and turning back the clock to reveal how these towns looked at key stages in their history.
You shouldn't be in here, should you?
From the Plantagenets to the Edwardians, the Civil War to the Second World War, I'll reveal the story of an era through the story of a single town. Today, I'm in a town whose story reveals the secrets of the Georgian era, like no other place in Britain.
Gosh, am I in a time warp?
Yes, we've gone back about 300 years.
You look magnificent.
Oh, you devil! A town where a new working class emerged at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. So they were drinking gin with sulfuric acid in it.
It's fiery, it's hot, and it's extremely poisonous.
And a town whose merchants became super rich on the proceeds from the world's vilest trade.
438 slaves. They have no notion of whether they're being taken to be killed or eaten or captured.
If you really want to understand the Georgians, then Bristol is the place to come. Bristol is my hometown, and the Georgian era is a time when the Bristol I love took shape. But it's a hard past to reconcile. The grandeur this city inherited from the Georgians came at a terrible human cost. In the 18th century, Bristol boomed as it became one of the main hubs of the world's slave trade. So I'm going to be digging deep, looking at the highs and the lows of Georgian Bristol. Today, Bristol is a bustling city of almost 500,000 people and a place of many identities, where the wealthy still live in grand crescents and elegant streets, above the urban and suburban sprawl. And with almost 100 languages spoken here, it's famous for its rich cultural diversity. But that mix of identities goes right back into Bristol's history. There have been settlements here inland from the Bristol Channel and on the banks of the River Avon for over 2,000 years. Sitting on natural trading routes with connections to Wales, the southwest and the Atlantic beyond, and inland access to London and the Midlands, it's always been a good place to do one thing very, very well. Make loads of money, and with Britain booming in the Georgian era, Bristol took full advantage. The Georgian era is named after 4 kings called George, who ruled between 1714 and 1837. German-speaking George I was succeeded by his son, George II, who died of a heart attack on the loo. George III sadly descended into madness, and George IV died of an excess of almost everything. But despite the relatively short and colourful lives of the Georges, Britain was transformed during their reign. To help me understand how Bristol positioned itself in the early 18th to 19th century, I'm meeting historian Professor Steve Poole in the heart of the city, on the quintessentially Georgian Queen's Square.
Hi.
Oh, nice to meet you.
And you, yeah.
This is such a, it's a splendid square, isn't it?
It's meant to be splendid. Queen's Square, probably the first really impressive piece of Georgian architecture the city sort of came into, so developed between about 1700 and 1730. This was built as really nice real estate for the wealthiest merchants in the city to represent their power, authority and economic success. The great thing about the square as a residential development in the 18th century was that it allowed wealthy people to create an elite space of their own. So you haven't got to look out upon the peasants and the filthy workers and the dirt and the squalor of the industrial city.
Keep out the poor.
Keep out the poor.
It must have been a huge amount of money pouring into Bristol during this
Loads
century.
of money, just loads of, yeah. But don't imagine for a minute that everyone in Bristol was wealthy. You know, this was a city which, from the beginning of the century, a population of around about 20,000 people. By the end of the century, there's about 63,000 people living here. It's growing really, really fast.
Yeah.
And most of them could never live in a place like this. So don't get kind of bamboozled by elegance, you know, because the poor, who made up the majority and did all the bloody work here, were living in cramped, dreadful conditions.
So beautiful Georgian buildings here, slums down there.
Not necessarily all slums, but much less grand buildings.
Yeah. So where did all this wealth come from?
It came from trade, big time with the world.
Yeah.
This is a really important port in 18th century England. Maritime trade brought in loads and loads of money to this city. But, you know, you have to also remember that warfare plays a rather large part in all this. 50% of the period is spent at war with somebody. This is an aggressive nation, make no mistake about that, carving out an empire for itself, which basically means more trade supremacy, more trade routes. At the end of the 7 Years' War in the 1760s, Britain is emerged as one of the, perhaps the most powerful player on the planet.
Yeah.
You know, it would be reasonable to call it a superpower.
So this is the foundations of empire?
These are absolutely the foundations of empire. You won't understand empire unless you understand what happened in the 18th century, and in particularly in cities like this one.
With Britain's navy busy expanding the empire, Bristol's merchants realised they were sitting on a prime piece of real estate. Bristol's success was all about location, location, location. Aerial archaeologist Ben Robinson has got a bird's eye view.
We're heading to Bristol to find out why this place is so Georgian. Bristol was an important trading area in late medieval times, but the Georgians took that to another level completely. We've got Queen Square below us. Queen Square is built right on the waterfront, so those newly rich merchants can keep an eye on what's going on the waterfront, can keep an eye on their merchandise and ships. But within a few years of the construction of Queen Square, the population of the town has doubled, and it's actually becoming quite uncomfortable to live in the centre of things. So the rich move out to new suburbs, Hotwells, and then up to Clifton. It's on the heights away from the city. This is literally social climbing. They've moved up from the harbour, onto Clifton, onto the hill, and now they're surveying their empire, they're surveying their world.
And the world they created up in Clifton perfectly reflects the aspirations of new empire builders coming to prominence in towns all over Britain. So I am a Georgian lady dressed in the very latest designer outfit, of course, and this is a horse. Now, in the Georgian period, we were harnessing the power of steam for manufacture, but horsepower was still the main way that people and goods were transported around the country. But it wasn't just about transport, it was about showing off as well. So the wealthy would have horses, they would have carriages, and they would drive around in them. I mean, who needs a Range Rover? Joining me for a horse-drawn tour of the houses of Georgian Clifton is antiques expert and Georgian architecture fan, Ronnie Archer-Morgan. Ronnie.
Alice.
Hello.
Gosh, am I in a time warp?
Yes, we've gone back about 300 years.
You look magnificent.
Oh, you devil.
You do, you look magnificent.
Let's go.
This is the way Georgian architecture should be viewed.
It is,
because this is the way it was originally viewed.
Yeah.
Georgian architecture was really about displaying the new emerging wealth. You can see the wonderful proportions that were adapted from Greek and Roman temples.
These buildings here are particularly fine examples, aren't they? And look, that one looks like a little temple.
Exactly, you've got the portico, you've got the columns either side of the door, you've got the pediment over the door. You've got those sweeps of narrow-housed terraces with all those lovely classic proportions, and they all look much the same. In order for each house to be identified, it was the first time that houses in this country were numbered.
Oh, is it?
It is, yeah. The visual harmony gives a feeling of internal harmony.
Yeah.
When you walk those streets or drive those streets as we are, in a carriage like this, how can you not feel wonderful?
Bristol's merchants also splashed out on the interior design of their beautiful Georgian houses. So this is John Pinney's house, Bristol merchant.
Oh, that's a nice bureau bookcase in mahogany. You've got the Greek pediment there.
So it carries on that theme that was on the architecture outside.
But this, for me, is the pièce de résistance. This is wonderful, this Blue John surround. At the time, this would have cost a pretty penny. Today, this would be a fortune. That is a statement. Look at that.
Oh, yes, it sparkles.
It is stunning. And there's his portrait looking down on us saying, "Don't touch my Blue John."
Leave my fireplace alone.
This is the drawing room.
It's lovely.
This is all about the carpet, this amazing Axminster.
Oh, it's Axminster.
It was fashionable because George III had Axminsters in his various piles, and so did George IV. So they were aligning themselves to the dynasties that ruled their world.
The library would have been where John Pinney could have shown off his Georgian worldliness. And we've got globes.
It's got the terrestrial and the celestial. These globes were costly. They were very skillfully made. You know, he's got the pair.
And he's a merchant, you know, he's making his money through global trade. This is globalization. You've got to understand the world.
The world has opened up. His guests can see that he knows where it's all going on. And to cap it all, he's got the Piranesi, Giovanni Battista Piranesi, master engraver and etcher.
These are beautiful. These are like postcards of the Grand Tour, aren't they?
Exactly that.
And this takes us back to that desire to emulate those classical empires.
Exactly. Those civilizations that they so admired and that everything here is about, really. Quality, dominance, success, wealth, empire.
This house shows off the cultured image John Pinney desperately wanted to project. But first and foremost, he was a businessman. From his bedroom window here, Pinney could look out over the whole city, and he could look down to the harbour where his ships were moored, the source of all his wealth. Of course, the money didn't appear from nowhere. There must have been a source that was funding Bristol and Britain's astonishingly rapid development through the Georgian era. There was, and it's always remained Bristol's deepest source of guilt and its darkest secret. The Georgian era saw an unprecedented expansion of the British Empire, and no city took the opportunity to cash in as enthusiastically as Bristol. But it came at a great human cost. Most of the splendours of the house I admired earlier were bought with the profits of the slave trade. Along with many of the most prominent Bristol merchants, the owner, John Pinney, earned his fortune from slavery. Pinney even commissioned this grand painting of the source of his wealth to hang on his drawing room wall. Pinney was a real entrepreneur. He grasped the opportunity that fell into his lap when he inherited a sugar plantation in the Caribbean on the island of Nevis. He owned over 200 slaves, and between them they produced 30,000 kilograms of sugar a year for him. The British began officially slave trading in 1660, when a company governed by the Duke of York was granted a royal charter to exclusively trade on the west coast of Africa. By the time the Duke of York had become King James II, his Royal African Company's monopoly was shipping an average of 5,000 people into slavery each year. Bristol's merchants desperately wanted to get a piece of the action, and after years of lobbying, in 1698, they got their wish.
They knew there was a potential to get extremely rich, extremely quickly, and that Bristol could even overtake London. And the reason for that is its place in the landscape, as Ben can see from the skies.
I'm just flying over the Kennet and Avon Canal here, and this is where the River Avon ceases to become easily navigable for boats. So they've dug this great stretch of canal heading straight onto London. And this was the key to Bristol's success. Not only was it a seaport, but also an inland port. So we're following the Avon from Bristol out towards the sea. It's about 8 miles or so. So Bristol's wonderfully sheltered. It's not right on the coast. But this river enables it to get to the estuary and then into the wider oceans. And really the world opens up to you then. So Bristol's ideally situated to pick up on these expanding trade routes, and crucially, the trade routes to Africa.
The River Avon and the Bristol Channel gave the city's merchants a natural advantage when it came to Atlantic trade.
But the success of the slave trade for Bristol, and in fact any other British port, relied on an entirely different force of nature.
And that was the power and direction of the wind. Wind that made this appalling trade in desperate people economically viable.
Hello, John. It's a bit of a miserable morning, isn't it?
It's lovely, isn't it?
Boat builder and sailor John Raymond Barker has followed this transatlantic trade route, and he's felt the full force of what were known as the trade winds.
Hot, hot, hot. Yeah, go, go, go.
This whole route, this triangular route down to Africa, across to the Caribbean and back to Europe again, that relies on these trade winds.
Yeah, you've got a great big circle going on in the Atlantic.
Yeah.
So coming down the coast, from Britain down through past Spain, North Africa, towards the equator, and the current will then shoot you across to the Caribbean.
And you've done this transatlantic crossing?
It's literally every single day and every night, just constant wind, around about 4 to 6 knots.
The consistency of this wind was a huge advantage for the slave traders, but had tragic consequences for their captives.
The second leg of that journey, of that trade route, was picking up human cargo from the west coast of Africa, taking that cargo to the Caribbean, where those people were destined to become slaves. So the reliability of those trade winds were crucial to the slave traders.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. If you've got a ship full of humans, they're going to use so much water up and so much food. And you can say, with those trade winds that will blow 8 days out of 9, for that time when you have the human cargo, you can say that you're going to be across in so many days.
Yeah, so the trade winds really facilitated that transport of slaves.
Yeah, unfortunately.
It was easy.
That's it.
It's an awful fact that British slave trading wouldn't have been possible and wouldn't have caused so much terrible suffering if it wasn't for the trade winds.
And British slave traders, of course, had the added advantage of having the Royal Navy, the preeminent Navy, supporting them when they were out at sea. It all boomed in the 18th century. So between 1690 and 1807, it's estimated that Britain traded 2.8 million slaves. And Bristol became the leader in what was then known as the triangular trade.
On the first leg of this triangular trade route, ships laden with goods would set sail from Bristol, heading for the west coast of Africa. Once there, they would exchange their cargo for the unfortunate people now destined for a life of slavery on plantations in the Caribbean. It was on this notorious Middle Passage where the full horror of this trade played out. At sea for 8 weeks, Ships would be crammed with people, manacled and lying in stacks of up to 5 bodies high on the lower decks. Chained to the person beside them, each slave would be imprisoned in a tiny space, measuring as little as 6 foot by 1 foot. Once the slaves had been delivered to their fate, the ships would reload with raw goods, valuable sugar from the plantations, and return to Bristol. In the 1730s, Bristol was Britain's busiest slaving port. Bristol's merchants would ship over 500,000 people into slavery. I'm meeting historian Dr. Edson Burton at Bristol's archives to look through records that the town's Georgian slave traders left behind that lay bare the wickedness of this profession.
Oh, thanks, Matt. So what have we got here then?
So what we have here is a list of ships belonging to the port of Bristol, trading to the coast of Africa. And it gives us a list of the ships' names and also the number of slaves in each voyage. So we can see here that there is sort of an average of 300, but we also have entries of much higher.
So there's 500 there.
Yes.
550, 650.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's 15,970 people landed in that year.
Yeah. It is just like any kind of ledger recording cargo, isn't it?
Seeing these stark figures on a ledger hammers home the inhumanity of this trade. No names, just numbers. People reduced to nothing more than goods to be trafficked.
But here, these numbers represent a number of people coming across from Africa. So these ships are going out from Bristol, presumably with goods to sell in exchange for the slaves on the African coast. What are they taking?
They're taking iron bars, manillas, glass beads. So a high return for Bristol in terms of we're trading an iron bar for a slave. And we know from a survey conducted that slaves sold for about £43 in the Caribbean. What you will find is an injunction to the ship's captain, bring healthy young Negroes, leave behind, the older slaves and so on.
Yeah.
What we have here is an account of the journey of the Black Prince ship, and it leaves Bristol on Thursday, the 6th of May, 1762.
Yeah.
But they really begin to accelerate the buying of slaves when they arrive at the port of Anamaboa. We can see here is the mentions of slave boys, women, children. So it's 438 slaves which are on board the ship when it departs for Antigua.
And very quickly they're starting to lose them. It says dead 1 woman.
Of the flux?
Of the flux, yeah, so
yes.
Diarrhea, yeah. Dead 1 man.
1 man.
Dead 1 man.
Gosh. And we have 1 girl dead.
Mm.
And they were normally thrown overboard when they passed.
That's horrendous. The 4th of March, the slaves intended to make the
another attempt. The other attempt got up 10 of the ringleaders and put them in chains and whipped them.
So they're trying to rebel. They're trying to get off.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, it's quite common on slave voyages that slaves would try and rebel. And they have no idea where they're going. They have no notion of whether they're being taken to be killed or eaten or captured. 1 sick slave endeavoured to jump overboard.
Right.
Yes. So a suicide attempt as well.
So they sight land on the 7th. So it's taken them just over 2 months to sail from Africa. Look, there's another one dead. Number 36.
Gosh.
Those contemporary documents are just incredible. You get a real idea of how much the whole city was invested in this trade. It's not just about the ship's captains and the sailors. There's all of the artisans here, ordinary people in Bristol, making things that get loaded onto those vessels to be exchanged in Africa for the slaves. And then the numbers of people. These are people being packed onto those ships, torn away from their families in Africa, loaded onto those ships. 438 people in one ship, setting sail for Antigua. And by the time they get there, 1 in 10 are dead. It's shocking, and it's particularly shocking seeing it written down, seeing the numbers, the hard evidence of this trade.
Evidence of Bristol's slave trading is woven into the fabric of the city, and one slave trader's name crops up again and again: Edward Colston.
Who was he? Who was Edward Colston?
Well, Edward Colston was born into a mercantile family, brought up in Bristol, and then he moved to London. And in 1680, he joined the Royal Africa Company. And between 1680 and 1692, the Royal Africa Company transported 84,000 slaves, and 65,000 of those were landed in the Caribbean and the Americas, which means a mortality rate of over 20. Colston dies in 1721, and I think, in his time, in his context, this is a legal trade. It is also theologically sanctioned. The Catholic,
how do you mean?
Well, the Church of England see no discrepancy between owning slaves and being a good Christian. So Colston would have seen himself as a good Christian.
Colston did Christian deeds. He was Bristol's greatest benefactor, charitably donating what today would be millions of pounds to the city. 300 years later, he's still memorialised as one of Bristol's most virtuous sons.
It creates such a tension, doesn't it? That you've got this man who was, during his lifetime, a philanthropist, pouring a lot of money into what were seen as good causes in Bristol. But he was making that money through slaving, through the slave trade. And I do find it quite extraordinary that his name is quite so prominent in Bristol still today.
Despite the horrific human cost of trading in slaves, Bristol's Georgian merchants were content to ignore the suffering as the profits rolled in.
Merchants didn't just get rich from exploiting slaves abroad, seemingly blind to basic human welfare. They were at it here as well, exploiting their fellow citizens.
I'm about to find out how tough life could be for the urban working class. I'm exploring Georgian Britain through the story of my hometown, Bristol. I've experienced the decadence of the new super rich and seen how their extravagant lifestyles were funded by the proceeds of the 18th century slave trade. And with global markets now opening up, luxurious commodities were becoming readily available for the first time. One product in particular would fast become a new British favourite, and also a great business opportunity: drinking chocolate.
Mark, I'm here to be your assistant in the chocolate kitchen.
Lovely.
Food historian Mark Meltonville is going to show me how the cocoa beans arriving in bulk were ground up to make drinking chocolate in the early Georgian era.
Presumably the demand was increasing then for chocolate.
Yes, you've got chocolate houses dotted around the cities like this, and they are seen as the place to go. There's where you want to be seen to be drinking these exotic drinks. And chocolate remains the most alluring, the most difficult to get.
How were people doing it? Entirely by hand?
Well, yeah, the process is all by hand. I happen to have borrowed a cocoa pod. You wouldn't see that in England. That grows somewhere
lovely.
12 degrees either side of the equator. There's about 100 cocoa beans in there. If you roast those seeds slowly, like coffee, suddenly you get the aroma of chocolate. That's what it looks like when it comes out of like a coffee roaster. It's the same sort of thing.
Oh. So this still looks a little bit coarse for drinking.
Well, what you have to do is you have to grind it, because that's all the flavour, but we've now got to stand here doing this for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours.
So okay?
Yeah, it's heavy. It's not very exciting, is it?
That looks fairly fine to me, so I'd like to try and make that into drinking chocolate.
OK. The simplest ones were made with hot water.
Yeah.
And so if we just put some of your, as you say, very well-ground chocolate.
Yeah, you can see that it's not really dissolving.
It looks like hot chocolate. It probably smells like hot chocolate.
It definitely smells like hot chocolate. Yeah, it's really gritty.
Yeah. Oh, well.
I think it's all sinking to the bottom, to be fair.
Luckily, an enterprising Bristolian named Walter Churchman was thinking big and came up with a solution to the problem of gritty drinking chocolate. It proved to be an invention around 30 years ahead of its time.
It's generally agreed that the Industrial Revolution in Britain started in the 1760s, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't manufacturing on a large scale going on before that. And in Bristol, there was refining of products coming in from the plantations.
Matt Coles at the Bristol Archives has a document proving Churchman invented the world's first cocoa grinding machine.
What is it, a patent letter?
Yeah, a letters patent for manufacture of chocolate.
Oh, let's have a look then. So it says from George II, by the grace of God, and it's been granted to Walter Churchman of our city. And is this it here? A method for the expeditious, fine and clean making of chocolate by an engine.
The patent was granted in 1729, and just over 30 years later, a chocolate maker named Mr. Joseph Fry bought the patent. In 1777, he improved and expanded on the design on an unprecedented scale.
And he moved his operations right here. This was the site of the first ever industrial chocolate factory.
In the pre-steam Industrial Revolution, Mr. Fry built his vast chocolate factory here to harness the flow of the River Frome, which ran through this part of central Bristol in the late 18th century. By the end of the decade, Fry's chocolate factory had expanded even further, and Fry became the world's first chocolate manufacturer to turn to steam power, with engines designed by James Watt, one of the Revolution's most famous sons. And around the factory, Bristol developed one of the world's first truly industrial cityscapes. Ben's getting a better view of the Georgian constructions that define the way Bristol looks today.
Another great Georgian idea, the suspension bridge there, that didn't come to fruition until the Victorian era, but was the Georgians that had the idea. Another thing that was absolutely key to the success of Bristol was mitigating this great tidal range, up to 50 feet between high tide and low tide. And that meant you had to time your arrival to Bristol very, very carefully. Now, to make Bristol effective, not just as a seaport, but an inland port, they came up with the idea of a floating harbour. Locks could keep the water levels high in the harbour area there. Boats wouldn't have to beach on the mud. And basically, you've got a 24/7, every day of the year, trading route. I think that's another thing that I get from the aerial perspective. It's the enormity of these engineering tasks. We're entering an industrial age. The Georgians have a certain amount of industrial clout, but they don't have machines that can excavate the canal basins, that can excavate the docks. All that earth moving, all that digging has to be done by hand.
The people who did the hard manual labour on the floating harbour, like those who would later go on to build the suspension bridge, emerged as a new British working class at the end of the Georgian era. But Bristol's urban poor had been a distinct class since the start of the 18th century. Labouring in the harbourside factories, they worked long hours and were paid very little.
But the poor, even with their meagre wages, could afford to do something to help them forget, something that some of us still do at the end of a long day.
They drank copious amounts of gin. In the early 18th century, anyone could open a distillery, and low taxes on British wheat meant that alcohol could be brewed for next to nothing, causing the perfect conditions for an epidemic of gin drinking that threatened to destabilise Britain. Historian Richard Barnett and gin maker Liam Hurt both have a special interest in gin and what became known as the gin craze.
This was an episode, really, of great social anxiety. In the 1720s, 1730s, Bristol has some of the worst effects of the gin craze.
Gin is being seen as an addictive drug.
Absolutely. So many of our modern arguments about addiction, I think, go back to the gin craze. In many ways, it's a great social and political experiment. What happens if you deregulate pleasure? Thanks to the gin craze, almost anybody in Britain between about 1720 and 1750 can get drunk really for a few pennies.
I noticed Hogarth's Gin Lane up here.
We've got the great Hogarthian scene of kind of social breakdown, but also physical breakdown as well.
Yeah.
You can see the houses almost look drunk. The whole city is falling to pieces.
So, Liam, you're making gin here in this distillery?
Yeah, we distill here. We use all sorts of botanicals. Any gin, the primary botanical is juniper berries.
18th century gin, was it much different?
Juniper's the predominant flavour, although for cost-cutting reasons, they'd often substitute something like turpentine instead of using juniper berries.
This is partly with the idea of making it go further as well. If you can make the drink taste stronger and fiery, you can dilute the alcohol.
Was there terps in it?
Well, terps wasn't the worst thing. We do have one recipe from Southwark in about 1740 that suggests you put oil of vitriol in it, and oil of vitriol is the 18th century name for sulfuric acid.
So they were drinking gin with sulfuric acid in it?
It's fiery, it's hot, and presumably it's extremely poisonous.
What is that? Is that something that you produced earlier, Liam?
Yes,
that makes me slightly worried.
there's no turpentine or sulfuric acid in this one, but it is based on the recipes from back then. Would you like some?
I would love to try some. I mean, it's not the colour I was expecting.
There you go.
It smells strong. Are you sure you haven't put any sulfuric acid?
No sulfuric acid.
Oh my God, that's strong. It's not that pleasant.
It's really not, and I think this is something really important at the heart of the gin craze. What's important here isn't a particular spirit. What's important is the idea of oblivion in the glass. To the working poor of Bristol and to the working poor of London and for Britain more generally, this was a way out of the most grinding kind of urban poverty. I think this is why this addictive street drug swept through the slums of Britain.
After many unsuccessful attempts, the government finally passed a bill abolishing mass gin making in 1751.
With the gin craze over, Britain's working class awoke from its stupor and realised they were getting a pretty raw deal, and a revolutionary fervour would sweep the country.
And in Bristol, this would lead to Britain's biggest and bloodiest massacre. Even though I grew up here, I'm uncovering things I never knew about Bristol's astonishing development through the Georgian era. In the early 18th through to the 19th century, the fortunes made in this city from the slave trade drove Bristol to the vanguard of the Industrial Revolution, creating a new working class who trebled Bristol's size by the end of the 18th century.
But there was a growing sense of injustice as the urban poor woke up to the gross divisions in Georgian society. You had the almost destitute factory workers toiling away down here, struggling with the rising cost of living, increasing food prices, while the elite rich were swanning about up in Clifton. Things were about to come to a head.
I'm meeting a local historian with a special interest in the development of Bristol's Georgian working class, Steve Mills.
So in the 18th century, then, you've got almost a rising class consciousness?
Absolutely. Don't forget it was the French Revolution. People were aware of what was going on over there and why there was a revolution. I mean, that started off as a bit of a glorified food riot, but it became very political very quickly.
Yeah.
And people over here, you know, it's very much a face-to-face society. The very, very poor would live cheek to jowl with the very, very rich. They would see them going about their lives in their opulent carriages and such likes, and they would feel aggrieved, you know, and they would realise that they were working hard to raise money for these people to live like this.
In 1831, tensions boiled over. On the 29th of October, a large crowd of protesters gathered here in Queen's Square, seeking political reform.
Basically, only 10% of the population had the vote.
Yeah.
So yes, they were very unhappy.
And so began Britain's bloodiest riot.
I mean, this is Queen Square. This is such a symbol of Bristol's wealth for the Bristol merchants. And this is where the riot happened.
This is where the main part of the riot happens, yes. And in my opinion, there was 3 stages to the riot. It was very vociferous, noisy, but not particularly violent. A few windows broken.
Yeah.
And then when the snatch squads come out, people started burning stuff, basically. There were painters at the time, and they painted all these fires all over the city. The crowd were picking out places. It wasn't some random outpouring of earth. This was like, you know, distinct, targeted rioting.
The corporation merchants must have thought this was it. They must have thought this is the beginning of a revolution in England.
Absolutely.
How did this riot come to an end?
Eventually, a major Mackworth turned up, and this was Monday morning at 5 o'clock. So the Dragoons had an easy target, and they came from over there, and they came through, and they cleared the square. They sent a lot of the mob back in to the buildings, into the burning buildings. Others were sabred and cut down. There was at least 12 died in the customs house. 12 at least killed around the bottom of the statue here. There was lots more killed in the city streets. They said from Thursday to Sunday there were people still walking around Queen Square with baskets picking up body bits. We will never know the true figures because the amount of people who died in the buildings and were burned, basically to cinders. Major Mackworth writes to the magistrate that he killed, or not him personally, but his troop killed at least 120.
Really?
Yes. Biggest massacre due to civil disobedience in this country, yeah.
What are the official figures?
The official figure's about 14.
The Bristol riots reflected a fight for equality that swept through late Georgian Britain. This spirit also drove a growing recognition of the utter immorality of slavery, the trade that helped make Bristol's fortunes at the beginning of the era. But the full emancipation of all British-owned slaves didn't happen until 1838, and only after the government had agreed to compensate British slave owners to the tune of £20 million. In today's money, that's over £1.2 billion. In 1838, the government had to borrow the money to pay off that vast sum. The interest wasn't paid off by the UK taxpayer until 2015. I'm not sure we've really got over the slave trade in Britain and in Bristol. It's one of those subjects that, you know, we talk about, but then we close it off. You know, it happened in the past. But when you open it back up again, I think there's a lot of anger and guilt there. Well, Bristol Old Vic is making it their mission not to forget. Built in 1766, the Theatre Royal, now known as the Old Vic, was one of the first theatres in the country to produce plays that directly addressed the iniquity of slavery, and they're continuing the tradition today.
Ask people about the British slave trade today. They say, yeah, it was wrong, boo-hoo, move along. But remember, it was a different time. They didn't know it was a crime.
I'm meeting writer and actor Giles Turrara and artistic director Tom Morris. Their new play is about an infamous insurance claim made by the owners of a Georgian slave ship called Zong in 1781 after the crew threw the whole cargo of captives overboard.
They are seemingly low on water and therefore they take a decision to commit this act.
It's a mass murder, basically. Yeah. And it's unclear exactly, historically, how the decision was made, but the thing that is spoken about in the court hearing is essentially pursuing an insurance claim for loss of goods for 132 murdered, enslaved Africans.
So when they're talking about goods, they mean people?
That's the point.
And why now? Why is it important to write this play and put this play on now?
Britain still has to deal with its slave trading past and the legacy of that. Not only the fact that so many of our cities were sort of built on the back of slavery, but also the sort of psychological, the spiritual trauma that comes off the back of it.
Bristol, like many cities in Britain, has completely failed to look with any kind of bravery at its historical engagement in the transatlantic slave trade. There's a kind of suppression of that part of our history, which means that we can't learn anything from it.
The story looks at what happens when individuals do not address social injustice, when you don't act in the face of something you know is wrong. That will always speak to whatever period I think you're in. There are always social injustices going on. So I think that's the relevance for me to tell the story now.
This retelling of the story aboard the slave ship Zong is just another way that modern, multicultural Bristol is trying to embrace the challenges that come with such a problematic past.
'It's a mass murder, basically. And it's
Bristol is my home city, and exploring this history has been far more emotional than I would ever have imagined. In the Georgian era, this place became Britain's second city. Exploiting global trade routes, it grew rich from slavery and became home to icons of the industrial age. The Georgian era was the time when Bristol helped create the Britain we know today.
But we cannot forget that this was also a time of great injustice and inequality. And there was activism that led to social changes which would ripple out across Britain and eventually the world. I know I'm biased, but for me, Bristol is Britain's most Georgian town.